Hi everyone, and welcome back to my Wargames hobby channel. Today I'm going to show you how to play the Saga rules that I use. There we are, there's the rule book. And I'm going to be using a couple of armies from the Age of Vikings supplement. I've actually been playing Saga for some years. In fact, just recently I haven't played as much because that tends to happen with sets of rules, doesn't it? You tend to get into them and then something else comes along and you lose interest, and you always come back to them eventually. And I've been playing them for quite a few years now. I wouldn't say I was an expert at Saga, but I know pretty much how they work. So I'm going to now go through how to set up a game and how to play a game of Saga. And Saga is for the Dark Age period, and there are various armies in the Age of Vikings book that you can use, but the two I'm going to use today are two fairly simple armies to use: the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. There are certainly a couple of armies that I wouldn't recommend for someone that's starting to play Saga, but those two are good examples of what can give you a good game. So the first thing to do is to set the game up, and of course the very first thing to do is to decide what figures you're going to use. Now you can see there's three main troop types that you can use. There's a levy, warriors and hearthguard. The levy are exactly that. They're locally raised forces that are normally armed with a bow or a javelin or crossbow or slings. They can be just spear armed as well, which is one of the features of the Anglo-Saxon Army. They can be spear armed, and I'll explain why you would do that a little bit later. But usually levies are some sort of missile armed troops that are better off not getting into combat. You'll see on the list here the levies, for example, with bows. If you look along the line, it says 3 and 3 in both the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. That's the armour that they have. So in melee they've got an armour of 3, and they've got the same for missile fire. But then you've got the third and the 1/2 in brackets. That means that the in brackets, that's the second figure, is how many shoot from a unit. So a unit of levy is usually 12 men. So a unit of levy would shoot with 6 of those men every time it opens fire. If in combat though, it only uses a third of the men, so only 4 figures out of 12 will actually fight. Now you'll see that on the Anglo-Saxon list there are spearmen, and they've got 4 and 4, so they've got a shield. They're better actually at fighting, but they're still only fighting with half the men, so only 6 figures will fight out of 12. Now if you look up to warriors, forget the shaded areas for the minute, I'll come back to those later, but in the look at the Anglo-Saxons, for example. They have an armour of 4 in close combat and for missile fire, but it's 1 dice per figure. So a unit of 8 men, which is what usually a warrior unit is, all 8 figures would fight. So you can see that if they took on a unit of levy in close combat, they're going to have twice as many men, or twice as many chances to hit. They roll 8 dice rather than just the 4. Which is why levy gets slightly more dice to roll if they're shooting, and also the enemy are not fighting back, so they're really better off not getting into combat. If you look at the again, we're still looking at the Anglo-Saxon board. If you look at hearthguard, and forget the word horse for the minute, if they're on foot they've got an armour of 5 and 5. For each figure used you get 2 attacks, but hearthguard units are only 4 strong. But they do get the same amount of attacks as a warrior unit. But of course you can see that armour is better. They've got more chance of defending themselves. You can also see that the Anglo-Saxons can be on a horse. You notice that none of the Vikings can at all. So the Anglo-Saxons, I don't usually have Anglo-Saxons on horseback, to be honest. For me, it doesn't quite feel right. I'm going to use some Hearthguard today on the Anglo-Saxon side, just to show what they're like to have a mounted unit on the board. But you'll see they still fight with a defence or an armour value of 5, but if they get shot at, which is what that number 4 is in brackets, if they get shot at, they've only got an armour of 4 because they're a bigger target. Now you'll notice here that the Vikings can have Varangians, or Varangian Guard as they were well known, which have got heavy weapons. They've got an armour of 5, but against shooting 6. But you can only have these, or incidentally they've got an aggression of 2, like normal Hearthguard. But you can only have them if you've got a maximum of 1 unit of 8 figures, and only if Harald Hardrada is your warlord. Now, I mentioned that you can upgrade your warlord if you wish, and the Vikings can have Harald Hardrada as one of their upgrades if they wanted to, and the other one, in fact, is Ragnar Lothbrok, King of Sweden and Norway. And they have certain benefits. The one benefit, the normal benefit, is that they get 2 Saga dice. So that's really, really worth having. And you can see if you have Harald Hardrada, it describes a little bit about him, about his history. And you can have a unit of Varangian Guard, so that's why you would have Harald, to have these Varangians. I'm not doing that today, but just to give you an idea that on every single army list, there is the option to upgrade your warlord to a legendary unit, and in this case the Vikings could have had Harald. However, with only a 4-point game, it's hardly worth doing, because if you did that, to have 8 Varangians would be another 2 points. And having spent the point upgrading your warlord, you've only got 1 other point you can use. So it really wouldn't be a wise move to have on such a small force an upgraded leader, an upgraded warlord. But if you're having a game with 6 or 7 points, then you might that's worth considering. And then finally, you've got the warlord. You can see the Viking and the Anglo-Saxon warlords are normally 5. They like their Hearthguard. They've got a pretty good armour, and but this again, the warlord on the Anglo-Saxon side can be mounted. And again, I'm using a mounted figure in today's game as a demonstration. Personally, I wouldn't. If I was using Anglo-Saxons, I would have him on foot. But that's a personal choice. You are allowed to, because the Vikings don't have anybody on horses at all. And you'll also see that, of course, the warlord gets 8 attacks. He's a seriously good fighter. So if he gets stuck into a unit of warriors, he'll get the same attacks as a warrior unit, an 8-man warrior unit, and he'll get 8 attacks. But of course, he's got better armour. So that's the sort of different troop types you get. So just to recap, levy are your very cheap, locally raised men that are just armed with maybe a shield if they're lucky, if they got a spear. If not, they're just bow armed or crossbow or sling or javelin armed. They are units of 12. Warriors are in units of 8 usually, although that can change in the game. You don't have to have them in 8s. It costs you a point to buy 8 warriors, for example, but you could, if you wanted to, split them into 2 units of 4. So why would you do that? I'll explain that in a minute when it comes to how many dice you make from that. Hearthguard, the minimum size of a unit is 4, incidentally, so you couldn't reduce a Hearthguard unit from 4 down to 2 lots of 2. It would have to stay at 4. But you could pay to have 2 Hearthguard units of 4 and join them together to make 8. That would be a very powerful unit indeed. But we're not going to do that again today. I'm going to try and keep things simple. This takes a bit of explaining, because otherwise, you won't know what sort of army to choose. I'm going to go for a 4-point army. The warlord is always free, unless you upgrade him. So I'm going to have 4 points to spend on each army, and I'll show you what I've done now and what I've chosen for this game. Right, so here's the Viking army. We've got the Warlord here in the middle. I'll tell you what these are in a minute, what these little discs are. You've got a unit of warriors here, another unit of warriors the other side of that army, and then you've got 2 Hearthguard units. Now they're different there because these are like standard Hearthguards, which have got an armour of 5 and they've got 2 attacks each. But you'll notice on the Viking list, here we are, there's the Viking list again, you can have what's known as Berserkers. They still count as Hearthguards, but they are Berserker Hearthguards, and these are quite different. They've only got an armour of 3, and as you can see, it's because they're actually naked. Berserkers were complete nutcases, and they didn't like to have wear armour. They were headbangers basically. They would just charge in and didn't mind dying at all. They ended up in Valhalla if they died. So they very often used to be undressed, or certainly not much armour. This chap's got a cloak on, but that's all. And these guys are complete nutcases, and they charge in, but they do get 4 attacks per figure. So when that unit of Hearthguard or the Berserkers charge into melee, they will get 16 attacks, which you can imagine can do a serious amount of damage to any unit that it hits. But they expect to die themselves because they've only got armour of 3. Of course, one thing about that is Berserkers are very vulnerable if they're shot at, so you need to keep them away from missile troops if you can until they get stuck in. So that's the Viking army. The Warlord, I mentioned these markers here. Whilst on the subject of warlords, the basic Warlord still has some special rules which make the Warlord the best unit on the table. First of all, they have determination, which makes them activate themselves. They have we obey, which means they can activate a unit to do something, charge or fire or move. They can only do that once. Then they have presence, and this is where it's a special rule. A Saga ability requires you to count the figures in a unit. Each figure counts as 4 models. It's still only 1 figure on the table, and it does, as you'll come to see in a minute, it has got 8 attacks, but it is still only 1 figure. It's also got resilience. Now resilience is important in so much that it doesn't die straight away if it gets hit and it doesn't save that attack. It can actually convert it to fatigues instead, and it can take 3 fatigues until it's exhausted, and then it will die. But it can also use the bodyguard's special rule, which means that if there are Hearthguard nearby, it can transfer those kills across to the Hearthguard instead. So with a Hearthguard unit nearby, it's very hard to kill a Warlord. The last thing, and this is very important, is pride. So when an enemy Warlord is within charge range and your Warlord wants to charge, it must charge the enemy Warlord. It can't pick another unit to charge instead. If the Warlord is contactable and you want to charge, it must be the opposing Warlord. So those special rules are quite important for when you're using your Warlord. These are the 2 we're using today. We've got a Viking Warlord and we've got an Anglo-Saxon. There we are, on a horse. Normally I'd have him on foot myself personally for Anglo-Saxons, but I just want to show that there are 2 types, and I'm using both types, one on foot and one on horse. The Warlord can activate a unit nearby. Anything within S it can activate. That's what this WO stands for, we obey. So you can order that unit to move. You can only do that once, and once he does that, I remove that marker. That's there just to remind me that I haven't yet ordered anything for that Warlord, because I'm a bit forgetful these days. The A stands for activation. You can activate himself to move as well. So he can do two things. He can order somebody to do something, and he can order himself to do something. Otherwise, units move by use of dice on the board, which I will explain a bit more later. Right, the Anglo-Saxon Army, let's have a look at those. Up here we have a unit of levy spearmen here, a unit of bowmen, turn this guy around so he's facing the right way, a unit of bowmen in the middle, again levy, some warriors here, and then we have the warlord on horseback here with 4 Hearthguard behind. So they're the 2 armies I'm using today. So that gives a pretty good representation of the troop types you can use in a Saga game. The next thing to talk about is how you generate Saga dice. Each unit on the table will generate a Saga dice. The Warlord generates 1. Any unit of Hearthguard generates 1. So even if it's only got 1 figure left, it'll still generate a Saga dice, as does the Berserkers. Warriors generate a dice as long as there's at least 4 men, and the levy over here generate a dice as long as there are at least 6 men in a unit. So once they get below half strength, they don't generate a dice anymore. So for an example, in this Viking army, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That army is generating 5 dice. If I decided to split this warrior unit into 2 units of 4, then it would generate 6 Saga dice. But of course, as soon as either of those units take a casualty, they would no longer develop a Saga dice. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it simple. Likewise, the levy over here, you could split, say, the spear levy into 2 units, and they would generate then 2 dice between them. But as soon as they take a casualty, they'll lose that dice, so they're going to stay also as a unit of just 12. You could do the same for the bowmen as well. In fact, there is an argument for doing it with bowmen, because 2 units of 6, they're only going to be firing with 3 each, but it does generate 2 dice, and if you keep them back out the way so they don't get into combat, they should keep that for quite some time. And the other interesting thing is, of course, the Vikings have got no missile troops at all. Vikings, they can have bowmen, levy, but I've always played Vikings very aggressively, and so I tend to just have troops that get stuck in. Because if you look at their board, have a look at the board now, there's a lot of things on that board which you gain benefits from putting dice on. Oh yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are 6 different things you can do on the board that will increase the effectiveness of a Viking unit in melee. On the Anglo-Saxon board, there's 1, 2, 3. There's only 3. In fact, you could argue this one is as well. This is an order. This has to be placed before you start moving, but that actually, until the end of the turn, levies have an aggression of warriors during melee. I'll explain that in more detail later, but that's quite a good melee one to use as well. But you can see that the Viking board is very aggressive, so you need to get stuck in, which is why they're quite a simple army to use. They don't hang about. There's no, diplomacy. There's no defence. You want to get them stuck into those Anglo-Saxons as quick as you can, and if you do that, you should win. The Anglo-Saxons are quite different. They're a little bit more cagey. First of all, they've got a bow unit, so they want to be able to do damage on the Vikings before they get there. And they're not so keen to get into melee, so they're going to be a little bit more cagey. But there's certain things on the board that are going to be very useful to both sides, which I'll go through now. If you look on the the Viking board, for example, let's just take the Frigg, which is the second one down on the left. So that remove fatigue from a unit or gain 3 attack dice. So you can use that anytime you like. Sometimes if you've got a fatigue on your unit, which I'll explain later, it's worth removing, but if not, you can just gain another 3 attack dice. And if you can combine that with something like 4, you can inflict extra automatic hits for each 6 or more roll on your dice. So if you're rolling a lot of dice and you think you might roll a lot of 6s, then spend the dice to use Thor. Now every time you, if you roll 5 dice, you then have to put those on the board, and you use those to either activate the units, which is the top of this board is used to activate units. So any dice will activate a unit of Hearthguards or a hero. Those types of dice there will activate warriors, and those dice will activate Vikings. So if you want to say, for example, shoot your levy, which is here, you have to use one of these 2 types dice. So you can put them on there, and you can know you can open fire with that unit. If you wanted to move warriors, you could put say 2 dice on there, and you could then move 2 units of warriors. Now, but before we start the game, we have to set up the table, and I've already done it because it's going to save a bit of time, but I want to now talk through with you what actually happened here. Now if you look in the rule book about setting up, first of all you have to roll to see who the first player is in the game, and I rolled that and it was the Vikings. So the first thing we've got to do is put out some terrain, and you can see I've already put it out, but let me just show you the limitations of what you can do. You can see here that there's several different types of terrain pieces you can have. For example, you can have a hill, but if you do that, it has to be a large hill. And you can have, at the bottom, you can have 3 woods, but you can only have 1 large. The other 2 have to be small. And although you could have another large steep hill as well, and ruins, you can have 1 small one. So that's the variety of terrain types you can have. Right, so the first thing we have to do is set the table up. Now ignore where the troops are for now, because I've done this sort of to save a bit of time during the game, but I've set the terrain out. The Vikings were the first ones. They both sides rolled a dice. The Vikings became the first player, so they get to put the first piece of terrain down. And the Vikings, because they don't want really any terrain at all, they want big open grounds and they can charge around like madmen, they decided to put a big hill area right in the middle of the battlefield. And because they're not worried about that, it doesn't slow them down. It does mean that the enemy bowmen can't shoot through it. They can shoot any unit that goes onto the hill, but not beyond it. So that's quite a useful thing. Then it was the Anglo-Saxon turn, and they put a big wood over here on the top corner. They're hoping they'll be able to deploy at the end of this measure into the wood, and that was the idea anyway. That was the plan, although in a minute I'll explain why that might not have happened. But anyway, that's their piece of terrain. The Vikings have to put a second piece of terrain down, and they decided to put a little field over here, which again is not going to be a big problem for them. They also put it quite near their table edge because it won't interfere with anything. They had to put something somewhere, and they didn't want to put anything in a position that was going to slow them down. They can't have another hill. They're only allowed to have 1 hill. If you look on the list here of things they can have, hill, they can only have 1 hill. That's the maximum. That's a large hill, which is what they've got in the middle. So the next thing that really wouldn't cause them much problem would be a field or scrubland. It does count as low and uneven, and it gives light cover, but they're not going to use it anyway because they left it near their table edge. There we are. Then the Anglo-Saxons put, in fact this here was placed further up, and originally, and that was a marsh area. Again, if they didn't get to deploy their bowmen in that wood, they were going to deploy into this marsh, which was just about where this area is here. And then it's the Vikings' turn, And they decided they didn't want any more terrain to go down, because once there's 3 pieces of terrain on the table, and now there were 4, they elected not to place any more terrain. But if they do that, they can move a piece on the table. And they decided to move that marsh back, M, which is, they moved that far back. It wasn't, say, it was here. And they decided to move that marsh back, so it's not as such an important piece of terrain. And then the Anglo-Saxons get to put one more piece of terrain down, and they placed another smaller wood here, which they hopefully will be able to make use of. They would have preferred to have it further that way, because it means when they deploy, again, they hoped to be able to deploy into where that originally the marsh was. But you cannot deploy closer than S to another piece of terrain. So they weren't able to put it where they wanted it. So they just put it sort of a little bit further up, and they hope to get in there at some point early on in the game in the deployment. Right, the next thing that happened was that the Vikings have to put out at least half their units first, and their Warlord. So the Warlord placed these 3 units on the table himself, a unit of warriors and the Hearthguard. And then the entire army of Anglo-Saxons had to be placed out. Now at that point, if you can imagine, these guys weren't even on the table. It was quite possible that the Vikings could deploy to the right of the rest of their force over here. So the Anglo-Saxons wanted their bowmen to get in range. There's no point in putting them over there, because if then the Vikings did deploy to the right of the rest of their force, they're going to be out of range. They weren't allowed to deploy in that wood because it was too far away from their table edge. There's no point in them being in the marsh, because they wouldn't be able to shoot at anything. The wood would block their line of sight. So the first unit they deployed was the bowmen in the middle, so they can at least see those Vikings. At the moment they're too far away, because the range for a bow unit is L. I haven't explained about the measuring sticks yet, but there are 3 sizes of measuring sticks: L and M, which is that one, and S, which is that one. They're the 3 measuring sticks you use. All foot mover M, cavalry or mounted mover L, and that's also the fire range for missile troops. So you can see that they're not in range anyway, but they soon will be as soon as the Vikings move forward. Warriors to this side of them, and they've got the other levy to the other side. And the Warlord is just behind the bowman with his mounted Hearthguard. So that's how they set up. They couldn't leave that unit on its own with no support, so they really had no option but to end up deploying in that situation. They would have preferred to have deployed in the wood. The wood wouldn't give them, it would give them cover if they were shot at, but of course the Vikings haven't got any missile troops. But it would mean that the Vikings would have to move a bit slower. They move at S in a wood, so it would take a bit longer of them to be reached. The same with the marsh, but they couldn't go in either of those 2 locations because it meant they wouldn't be able to shoot anyone. So they've deployed where they are. So that's how we worked out the way the terrain is and why I've deployed where I am. So it's the Vikings to go first. That's a part of the scenario, and they roll 3 dice, and the first 3 dice I rolled were these 3. That's like they only get to roll in the first move. The rules do say that the first army that moves can only roll a maximum of 3 dice. They normally would get 5, as I mentioned earlier. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When it's the Anglo-Saxon turn, they will get 5 straight away. But for the first move, the Vikings only get 3 dice. And now we look on their board. Where's the best place to put them? Well, if I want to move, I'm going to have to use these movement areas up here, and you can put as many dice in there as you want. There's no restrictions as to how many dice you put on there. Any dice will move a unit of Hearthguard, In fact, there are 3 dice type. If you look at this one here, that's the common dice. You've got a 50% chance of rolling that on every single dice, because on the dice there are 3 like that. There are 2 of the bees, and there's just 1 of the lightning bolt, which is the rare dice. So any one of those dice will move Hearthguard. To move warriors, you use those type of dice. To move or activate or shoot the levies, or thralls, the Vikings are called, you use those dice. And you can put as many of those on there as you've got. Over here we have a combat bonus. If you're not sure what to do with the dice, stick it there, because every time you use a dice, you gain an extra combat, attack or defense, or however you want to use it, shooting, reaction, etc. If you use the lightning bolt, which is the rare dice, you do get 2. And over here we have an activation. If I had rolled a lightning bolt, you can use it on there, and you can then you can roll 2 other dice like that. But we didn't roll it anyway, and in fact in the first move you're not allowed to have any more than 3 dice, so there'll be no point in doing that. So what do I do with these dice? Well, the first thing is they need to get stuck in. Now we do know that the Warlord can activate 1 unit, and he can activate himself. So if he wants to use the warriors, he would have to put one of those there, for example. And in fact he could activate the other warriors over here if you put another dice there, and then put that one to activate the Warlord, the Berserkers. So the entire army could move forward in that first move with just using 3 dice, because he can activate 2 units himself on one other and 3 on the others. The other thing you could do is, see down here this Odin, that takes 2 dice. Where it's got a plus in between, you have to use 2 dice. So it's both of those dice would have to be put on there. And you'll see what that says. It says the shooting unit, that's the enemy shooting unit, will take enough fatigues as necessary for it to become exhausted. So that's a very powerful thing for the Vikings. It either means that when this bow unit, when it does open fire, it's going to become exhausted. And exhaustion is 3 fatigues. Every time you do something, it could mean the unit becomes fatigued. It doesn't get fatigued if it moves once, but for example, if I move this unit twice, if I've done once and the second time it moves, it will take a fatigue. So fatigues are gained various ways, either moving a second time, shooting a second time. Well, it's the second time it's been activated, really, it gains a fatigue. It also takes a fatigue after any melee, and you can use those fatigues in the game to your benefit, or negative, depending on which way around you want to. And you can use those fatigues from enemy units to your benefit later on. So I think the Vikings need to get stuck in. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them all on here. You can incidentally do a maneuver. If you're more than L away from any enemy, you can move for free. It doesn't cost an activation, but you can only move up to L. You could move the Berserkers over here for free. It wouldn't cost anything, but they would have to stay more than L away all the time. So the only thing they could do would be to come over here. But we want to get this army stuck in. So the Vikings are going to move everything they can this move. So I think what we're going to do here is we're going to get everybody moving, and I've put the dice down on the board I want to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to my Warlord, by using the We Obey order, is going to order this unit forward. So we place the ruler on the table and we move that unit up, and they move M. So that's the first unit moved. Then we're going to use one of the dice on here to move the unit of Hearthguard. So they're going to move up M as well. Put that there for a minute. Then he will activate himself to move. Yep, alongside. Take that marker away. And then with the other 2 dice, one is a warrior and one is a Hearthguard, he'll move the other 2 units as well. Let's move the warriors first. Put them on the hill slightly. And then we're going to move the Berserkers over here. They want to move up, but they've got to stay behind that hill. They don't want to be shot at, so they're keeping their heads down for the moment. I want to keep them a little protected. So that is the first move. You can see there's nothing left on the board. That is the Viking first turn. Now throughout the game, I won't go through every single move we do because it'll take too long. But initially I'll start showing you what each army does, and then we'll speed things up a bit later. But that's the first move. The Vikings are moved up in a determined way to get stuck in. Now it's up to the Anglo-Saxons to roll. Now, as I mentioned, they get 5 dice to get 1 for the warriors, 1 for the levy, 1 for the levy there, 1 for the Hearthguard and 1 for the warlord. So they get 5 dice. Now here's the same Anglo-Saxon warband. This time I've reduced the numbers of men in each unit to maximise the amount of Saga dice that they generate. So you can see now this warband, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Saga dice, because the 2 warrior units are made 4s, and all the levy have been made into 6s. So that gives a terrific amount of Saga dice opportunities. Obviously, other than the Hearthguard, if any of these units lose a single figure, then they won't generate a dice. But it does mean initially that you're going to get a huge amount of Saga dice to use on the board. Over back to the same sort of thing for the Vikings. Here they are. We've reduced them down to units of 4. So we got the 2 Hearthguard units, which are 4, have to be 4 anyway. They can't be any smaller. But all the other warriors are put into 4 small units. So that would generate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Saga dice. So you can see the flexibility, depending on how you want to play them. You either have bigger units and less Saga dice generated, or smaller units with lots of dice generated. There's advantages and disadvantages both ways. It's up to you, depends how you want to play them. So let's just see what we get when we roll 5 dice. Right, so we rolled a rare, which is like a 6. We rolled a horse, which is like a 4 and a 5, and 3 common. So where are we going to put them? Well, the first thing that the Anglo-Saxon commander will want to do is to open fire with his bowman, and it's really important that we do that. So that's going to cost, if you look at the board, well, the Anglo-Saxon board is slightly different. If you look at the way it's laid out, so units of 10 or more move on any dice. Units of at least 8 figures move on the rare and the axe. And then if they're less than 8 figures, they move with these 2 dice. So they're slightly different. It's very much based on the Anglo-Saxon army is very strong initially because they get a lot of bonuses for on their board for being big units. Now at the moment that means the levy can open fire with any dice. Now we've rolled 5. Nobody is within M, so we can't go into contact anywhere. And but they are within range, as you can see. So the Anglo-Saxons want to do as much damage as they can to the units that they can see. They can shoot at any of these. No point in shooting at the Warlord. They're not going to do any damage to him. They've got armour of 5. These have got armour of 4, so they're the obvious target. So we want to fire those. So if we put a dice up here so we can open fire with them at least. And see what else is on the board though that might be useful. This call to arms is a very useful thing to have, because if you read it, it says until the end of the turn your levies have the aggression of warriors. So it means that this unit here, which normally fights with only 6 men, the armor won't go up, but they will fight as if they're warriors, so you'll fight with 12 men. So that's a really useful thing to have, and that's worth putting this 6 on there in case we want to do that. Now we won't gain much benefit at the moment, this move, because of course they're not within charge distance of anybody, but I'm going to put that on there and use that maybe later on. Right, what else are we going to do? If we look at, there's a few unusual things worth mentioning. This Valiant Hearts, it's costs any dice to do it. And until the start of your next turn, all your units count as being 2 figures larger, 4 if you're Hearthguard, when determining effects of Saga abilities on this board. So the unit doesn't go up in size, but it does with regard to doing things on the board. For example, if you wanted to do truce, remove a fatigue from each of your units containing at least 10 figures. If you'd used Valiant Hearts, then both warrior units, if they did have fatigues, you could use 1 dice on the truce to remove both those fatigues. But there's another thing on here. For example, say you decided to use overlapping shields. That's a melee or shooting reaction. So you gain, by using that dice, any dice, say the axe, which is a common dice, you gain 2 defense dice. But you notice further on it says if a unit contains at least 10 figures, you also gain 2 attack dice. So if you use Valiant Hearts, so that lasts until the start of your next turn, and you have a dice here, it means that your unit will get that second benefit as well. Defenders of the Kingdom, for example, you gain 1 attack dice and 1 defense dice automatically with the use of one of the horse dice. But if your unit contains at least 10 figures, again, if you have used Valiant Hearts, you gain an extra attack and an extra defense dice as well. So you could gain on 2 or 3 things. So it's a handy thing to have, but then, you know, depends how many dice you've got. Right, so at the moment I've only put call to arms down on the Anglo-Saxons. I'm just trying to think. I really want to shoot with these guys. I want to do as much damage as I can, and I can actually put all 3 dice on there and activate them 3 times. But we do want something ready to defend when things start to go wrong. What's the best one to have? Now I'm going to put the horse on this one here. This is a defensive thing. It's a melee thing, but it gained 1 attack and 1 defense dice. And if the unit is more than 10, it gains the second one. So that's quite a useful one to have, seeing as I've got 2 units at the moment that I've got 12 men in anyway. So don't forget the Warlord also gets We Obey and its own activation. So what are the Anglo-Saxons going to do? Well, it's pretty obvious really. They need to open fire and try and cause damage on this unit. So the first thing we'll do is activate using that dice, because it activates a unit. It activates the hero, a Hearthguard, or any unit of 10 figures or more. So we're activating the bowmen to open fire here. We know they're in range, so they're now going to roll 6 dice, because the unit shoots with 6 dice each time. Now the armour for that unit, I'll put a little reminder down here, is 4. So we're hitting on 4s and above. So let's see what we get. So you can see we got 3 hits. So straight away this unit has got 3 hits on the warriors. But now they roll to save, and all saving throws from missiles is 4, 5 and 6. So we've got to roll 3 dice for these Vikings, and they rolled a 2 and 2 3s. They didn't save any. So 3 warriors have died straight away. That was really, really good shooting by the bowmen. Crikey, that's pretty good going. You'd normally expect to save at least 1, possibly even 2 of those. On 4s, 5s and 6s, you've got a 50% chance of saving with each dice, and they rolled really, really badly. So that's it. They've taken a hit there, and now what's going to happen next? Well, of course, yes, why not? The Anglo-Saxons will open fire again. There's no reason why not. They got the dice on the board to do so. But this time, because the second time they've activated, once they've shot, they will take a fatigue. So I'm going to put that down. You can't use that fatigue straight away, because the fatigue happens after they shoot. So they're still hitting those on 4s, and they're going to roll again 6 dice, hitting on 4s. This time they got 2 hits, exactly the same as last time. We need to see if we can save them. They saved 1 with a 5, and they didn't save the other, so another figure has gone. Let's take it off there. So they've lost 4 men, and the bowman unit has got a fatigue. So it's the Anglo-Saxons go again. Well, I think we're going to fire them again. They're doing so well, why not? Might as well open fire. But this time, and they've still got 6 dice, but this time the defender has the opportunity to use that fatigue. If they do use that fatigue, they can up their armour to 5s. So at the moment they're 4s, they can up it to 5s, or they can leave it on. This is where earlier, you remember I said to you we could have used this Odin, where the shooting unit takes as much fatigue as it is necessary for it to become exhausted. Really, the Vikings possibly should have done that, because it would have meant the first time that bow unit fired, it would have become exhausted. It would have taken 3 fatigues, and then it wouldn't have been able to activate again. So the Vikings have already dropped a bit of a clanger there. I shouldn't have moved the entire Viking army up. I should have had 2 of those dice on that Odin to stop this from happening. And of course the Anglo-Saxons are now making hay while the sun shines. As I said, we can use that fatigue, which we will do. So we're going to use that fatigue, and we're going to up the armour to 5. So now they're hitting on 5s. Incidentally, it's the 3rd time they have to take another fatigue back, because they're activating again. You can only activate them once normally a move, and every time you activate them after that, it's another fatigue. So they're now hitting on 5s. So 1 hit. And they're going to try and save that. And they do. So they save that. They haven't lost any more. The Anglo-Saxons were hoping to get that unit down to less than 4, because then they wouldn't get the Vikings wouldn't get a Saga dice for it. So it was worth continuing to shoot. Now, do they shoot again? There's no reason why they shouldn't. They will get another fatigue. And it's whether the Vikings want to spend that fatigue or not. I think the Warlord can order them, we obey, to shoot again. So again, they're going to fire at that unit. Do the Vikings want to up their armour? I think they will. So they'll put it up to 5. They'll spend that fatigue, which is already there from the last move, but they'll get another one back because they're being activated again. This time again, they're only hitting on 5s and 6s. 2 hits. 2 to save. 1 saved, 1 didn't. So that loses another man. So that warrior unit has been absolutely decimated by the bow fire from that Anglo-Saxon bow unit. I bet they wish they'd used Odin. Yeah, that was a big mistake. In fact, whenever I'm using Vikings, if you're facing a shooty army, you do need Odin really, because it does really either stop the opposing player using the bowman at all, or if they do, they can only use them the once. But there we go. I didn't. I made a decision to move everything up, and it was the wrong decision to make. Right there, the only other thing we can do now is we're not going to use this dice because we can't get in combat anyway to call to arms, and we're not going to use this because we're not in combat So we're just going to call it a day. The Warlord could activate himself, but he's not going to gain any benefit by moving anywhere, so he's just going to stay put. That won't be used this time. Okay, now it's the Viking turn. The Vikings can now use more dice. So it's now the Vikings' turn. Now they can't get a dice for that unit because it's below half strength, but they get 1, 2, 3, 4. So they do get 4 of Viking dice. Let's roll them now and see what we get. Right, 3 Bs and a common. There's no rare there, which they could have done with really. Okay, so now it's up to me to decide what I'm going to do on the Viking board. We need to get these guys into combat. So this is what I've decided to do. I've got 2 dice to move a Hearthguard unit. I've got 1 on Frigg and 1 on Loki. So let's move those and you can see why I've done that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move, use Herdmen. That's to move a unit of Hearthguard. I'm going to move these guys straight up. They can only go straight ahead. They can't bend around. But so the Berserkers have moved up, and I'm going to activate them for a second time to charge into the Spearmen. So straight away, the mad Berserkers have got stuck in. It's important to use them, not get them shot at. So I've decided while the Anglo-Saxons haven't got much defence, to use them straight away and see if I can do some damage. So they've gone in there. I've activated them twice, so I gain a fatigue because they have been activated twice. Now this unit has the opportunity, if it wishes, to close ranks. If it closes ranks, it gets a slightly better defense roll. So instead of saving on 5s and 6s, which normally you save on in combat, they would save on 4, 5, 6. However, it would mean that they don't get 6 attack dice, which that unit normally does. It would only get 3. And because they'd rather like to do a lot of damage to the Berserkers coming in, I think they're not going to close ranks. They're going to keep all their 6 attack dice in the hope that they can kill the Berserkers. So you remember I said that Berserkers get 4 attacks per figure. So they get 4, 8, 12, 16 attacks. The Levy gets 6 attacks. That's the first thing we do, is you work out how many attacks we're going to get. As I mentioned, if they'd gone into close ranks, these guys, they would have only get 3, but they want to try and finish those Berserkers off, so they're not going to do that. They're just going to fight as normal. So at the moment it's 16 against 6. And then it's up to the Viking player, the attacking player, to decide what they want to use off their board. The first thing they're going to do is use Loki. Let's have a look at Loki. There we are, this one here. I'll read out what that says. Loki is, until the end of the melee, gain 2 attack dice every time the enemy unit triggers a Saga ability or uses one of your fatigues. You'll notice I've got a fatigue, so if they now use that, I'll gain 2 more attack dice. So it really does negate or stop or make the Anglo-Saxon think about what he wants to do here. Now it's the Anglo-Saxons' turn to do something. They have got Defenders of the Kingdom, so they gain 1 attack dice and 1 defense dice. So they need everything they can get. So they're going to add 1 attack dice. Then we're going to put a white defense dice, there we are, over there, which we'll use in a minute. Okay, now if your unit contains at least 10 figures, which we know it does because it's 12 spearmen, gain an extra attack dice and an extra defense dice. So suddenly they're going up. So this is looking a bit better for the Anglo-Saxons. Now it's back to the Vikings to decide whether they want to use Frigg or not. They're not going to use Frigg. They're going to leave that there. So if you remember that the unit of levies, I've got an armour of 4. Let's put that 4 there to remind us. and the Berserkers have got an armour of 3. Now it's up to the Anglo-Saxon player to decide whether he wants to use this fatigue or not. Well, I think he's going to, which means he can either downgrade the armour of the enemy to 2, or he can up his own armour to 5, and I think that's what he's going to do. He's going to try and survive this, so he's now got an armour of 5. Now, of course, the Vikings use Loki, so it triggers the ability to gain 2 extra attack dice every time the enemy uses a Saga ability or a fatigue, so he's now got 18 attack dice. So that's it. We've got a roll to see now what the damage is. Let's turn that around a little bit. So let's do the Vikings. So let's see what we get. We're looking for 5s here. Okay, let's just push the 5s and take away the ones that missed. So using that fatigue was worthwhile, because in fact the Anglo-Saxons would have taken, look, 4 more hits if they hadn't done, because they would have been hitting on 4s. But they've got 8 hits, which they're quite happy with. Put those to one side for a minute. Put those over there. And now the Anglo-Saxons fight back, and they need 3s, of course, because that's what the armour is on the Berserkers. Right, so we're looking for 3s. Well, it's a pretty rubbishy dice roll, isn't it? Look at that. 2 4s and all the rest are 1s and 2s. So they would have expected better from that. So let's do those first. In combat, these guys, they got to roll the 2 dice that hit them. 5 and 6s save. Oh, would you believe it? Well, they saved them all, so none of the Berserkers have died. And now the Berserkers they've got to roll 8. Sorry, the Anglo-Saxons have got to roll 8 dice, but they gained 2 extra defense dice, which they gained earlier. So they need 5s and 6s to save. 1, 2. That funny looking dice there is in fact a 1. So they've only saved 2 of the 8 hits that they took. They lose 6. So crikey, that's a bit of payback for the Vikings. Right, both units that went in there take a fatigue because they've had a melee, and the loser of the melee must move away S. So they're going to end up back here. They've got to move S away, which they've now done, taking their fatigue with him. Okay, so that's that move finished. The Berserkers did really well there because they are vulnerable with only having an armour of 3. But on the dice, when it happened on the dice, the Anglo-Saxons rolled rubbish, didn't they? So there's nothing more on the board for the Vikings to do, because they actually, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have put that on Frigg. I should have put that on up here. I meant to. I thought about putting it on there to use to move an extra unit of Hearthguard, but I didn't. So there we are. That's tough on me. I made a mistake there. But of course, the Warlord has still got their activation and the We Obey to use. So he's going to order the Hearthguard to move forward. They can't charge, but they can get pretty damn close. So they've moved up right near to the bowman, and he's going to move up himself. So they're the 2 things that he can do. So that's all the Vikings can do. Unfortunately, they're not going to get another attack this time. And now it's up to the Anglo-Saxons to roll their dice. Okay, so you probably spotted my deliberate mistake earlier where I forgot to roll the 2 extra dice for the Vikings, because the Anglo-Saxons did activate off their board and because of Loki they should have got 2 more attack dice, so I'm going to roll them now. It's really important this, because this unit, the levy that lost 6 figures and they got pushed back, at the moment they still generate a dice, a Saga dice, and with 1 more kill they won't. So it's really important, so we should make sure we roll those 2 dice. So I'm going to do that now. So that's 1 hit, a 5. Just if you remember, we were rolling on 5s to hit. So now will the Saxons be able to save it? No, they don't. So that is another casualty off of that unit. As I say, it's really important because it means now that doesn't generate a Saga dice. So it is now the turn of the Anglo-Saxons, and they roll 4 dice. 4 Saga dice, that is. So this is what I've done. Now you remember we already had a Saga dice on call to arms, so that's going to stay there. And I've put 2 up here on activating units of 10 figures or more. 1 here activating a unit of less than 8 figures, and 1 here which is closed ranks, which I'll explain when I use it. So it's the Anglo-Saxon turn. The first thing the Anglo-Saxons have got to really do is to use their bow fire to kill as many enemies as they can, and the best target for them really are these Berserkers, because they've only got an armour of 3. These are the closest unit, but if the bowmen fire at those, they've got armour of 5. And in fact, if this unit used this fatigue, they could put it up to 6. So it's unlikely they're going to do a lot of damage. If they fire at these, they're hitting on 3s, even if they use the Saga dice here to up their armour to 4. It's still got more likelihood it's going to cause a casualty. The only problem with that is that 2 of the figures are just out of range. So 10 of those are in range, which means they get 5 shots, and that's what they're going to do. But before they do that, I want to move this unit out the way, because not only they're not in the way of the bowmen, but in a minute I want to use these cavalry, so I'm going to move that unit back. So I'm using the Saga dice to move a unit of 8, and they're going to move over here. The Viking player could actually use that Saga dice to slow me down, and they would only do S instead of M, so 4 inches instead of 6 inches. But it's not going to be any benefit to do that. They're still going to get out of the way of the cavalry, so he might as well let them do their M move and keep that fatigue. So the next thing is, say the idea for me is to try and wipe this unit out if I can, using these, but we want to weaken them first. So the first thing we're going to do is the bowmen are going to open fire on, so I've already used this dice here to move the levy unit, and now we're going to activate the larger unit to open fire. As I mentioned, they can only roll 5 dice because the other 2 are out of range. You get half the dice fire, so let's just see what happens. Now, do the Vikings want to use this fatigue marker? Well, I think they would do, because they want to try and save their Berserkers from taking too many casualties. So the armour now for this unit has gone up to 4. So let's roll to see whether these bowmen cause any casualties. Well, you can't see that, can you? There's only 1 hit, so that was not a bad start for the Vikings. Let's just roll to see whether it's a kill or not. They save on 4, 5 and 6, and they didn't. So one of the Berserkers has been killed, and now looking on the board, they can shoot again, which they will. We've got to whittle these berserkers down as much as we can. So they're going to open fire again. Again, it's 5 dice. Let's see what happens. Still only 1 hit. They're only hitting on... Oh, well actually, okay. When I increase the armour for this unit by using the fatigue from this unit, from the bowman, it only increased the armour for that turn. So now it's back to 3 again. Now, although they're activating for a second shoot, they don't get the fatigue until after they've shot. So the Vikings cannot use that fatigue to increase the armour again. So as you can see, instead of being 1 hit, it's 3 hits because they're hitting on 3s. So let's just see now whether they can save any of those. Well, they save on 4s, 5s and 6s for all shooting. So they have saved 2. So that's another one gone though. So they're whittling those down. Slowly the berserkers are dying. Now, the Anglo-Saxons have got a choice here. They can charge these guys in straight away, and they can do that because the leader here can tell his men to charge, or they can open fire again with this unit. But bear in mind that the Vikings will use this to increase their armour again. So I think we got to charge them in. The reason they're going to get 8 attacks, the Hearthguard will, but these guys will also get 8 attacks back. But the difference is, these have only got an armour of 3 and these have got an armour of 5. There's a fatigue here on this berserker unit. So the Hearthguard can either decrease their armour down to 2, so they'll hit on anything but 1s, or they can increase their own armour. They've also got Frigg on their board, which means they will get another 3 attack dice. You see when it reads that, it says remove a fatigue from a unit or gain 3 attack dice. Well, it will take 3, so it'll have 11 attacks. So the decision is, yes, we're going to, the Warlord will tell this unit with the we obey order to charge in onto those, and there's nothing that they can do to stop them. So in they go, get into contact. And now we're going to work out the dice. As I said, there's 2 guys here, they get 4 attacks each. So let's put those to one side. We give them the blue dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the Hearthguard get 2 attacks each, so they've got 8 dice as well. There we are, we give them the green dice. Right, just as a reminder, the armour at the moment on the Berserkers is 3, and the armour on the Hearthguard, the mounted Hearthguard, is 5. Now the Berserkers could close ranks, because the only time you can't close ranks is if you're missile units. But if they close ranks, they'll only get 4 attacks, but it will mean they've got a slightly better chance of survival. Instead of saving on 5s and 6s, they'll save on 4s, 5s and 6s. But since that unit is almost certainly going to be wiped out this move, I think they'll try and do as much damage as they can, so they won't close ranks. So the Anglo-Saxons charged in. They've asked if these guys want to go into closed ranks. They don't want to. So now they decide if they want to use anything on their board. Well, they've got closed ranks. And if you see there, it says if a unit has more figures than the enemy unit, gain 3 attack dice. Well, it does. But 5 attack dice if a unit has at least twice as many figures as the enemy, which it does. It's got 4 against 2. So it will gain another 5 attack dice. They're really going to try and wipe this unit out, aren't they? They're really keen. Right, so that's that dice used. Now it's the turn of the Vikings. They have got Frigg. So now it's either remove a fatigue from your unit or gain 3 attack dice. Now here's the dilemma. This is what you've got to work out when you use the board as to whether you think that's to your advantage or not. If you remove that fatigue, it means that the Anglo-Saxons can't use it to either increase their armour or decrease yours. Or you can keep it there and let them do that, but gain another 3 attack dice. Now 3 attack dice, obviously they've got armour of 5. Is that going to be better than removing that fatigue? I don't think it is. So I think that we'll remove the fatigue for free. So remove a fatigue from a unit or gain 2 attack dice. Well, it's not, or gain 3 attack dice. It doesn't want to do that. So it's now, at least it won't be used against it. So I think that's all we can do. There's nothing more on the Viking board, and the only thing on the Anglo-Saxon board is call to arms, which doesn't affect that. So I think it's time to roll to see what happens. So remember, the Vikings have got armour of 3. Let's roll the Anglo-Saxon dice first. Bring these back. So we're looking for 3s to cause a hit. Okay, so take out all the 1s and 2s. That's the easiest way to do this. There we go. That's 8 hits. So pretty good. Now the Vikings fight back with their 8 dice. And they want 5s, of course. Well, they've got 5s. When I say 5s, I mean 5 plus. So it's 5s and 6s. So they got 2 hits. That's a bit disappointing, really. I think they were hoping to get a few more there. Although, you know, 5s and 6s is only a 3rd chance. So with 8 dice, yeah, I suppose the average would be 3, wouldn't it? So they only got 2. So now it's the case of saving. Let's do the Anglo-Saxons first. They had 2 hits on them. They need 5 to 6 to save. No, they didn't. So 2 of those Hearthguard have died. But they should finish the Berserkers off. They've got 8 attacks. Let's just see if they finished them off. 5 and 6 is to save. They haven't got any. So they're completely wiped out. Now normally when a unit dies, if it's within S, the friendly unit nearby would take a fatigue, but it's not. So they'll be removed. And this unit takes a fatigue after a melee. The last thing that the Anglo-Saxons have got to do is they can move. He can give himself an order. So he's going to move. He's going to move over here first. He can move M first to go that way. Now he can, normally they move L, but cavalry can do their move in 2 halves. They can move M, they can move 2 M's. They can't charge. They couldn't then charge here. They can move using 2 different M rules, or 2 lots of 6s, 6 inches, which is what they're going to do. So they've moved across here, and they're just going to turn and get quite close to. The reason he's moved there is because if these Hearthguard should attack him, and he'll fight back with 8 dice, so he's got a pretty good chance of doing some damage on the Hearthguard. But he can take hits more happily than they can. He has to be exhausted before he dies. So the first hit on him will be a fatigue, the second hit will be a fatigue, then the 3rd hit will be a fatigue, and the 4th hit would kill him. But with these 2 Hearthguard nearby, he can use the bodyguard's role, which means that instead of dying, he can sacrifice one of his own men. So that puts him in quite a strong position next to his Hearthguard unit. Obviously, if these guys decide to charge in here, then he's nearby to be able to charge back in his turn. So that's why he's moved there. Right, so that's the Anglo-Saxon turn. So what am I going to do? Well, the Vikings have only got 3 dice. They need to move these warriors up though and get them into combat. So I'm putting both dice to move the warriors. And I'm using 1 on Frigg. You'll see why in a minute. Right. So the important thing to do is to get these guys up. So we're going to use that first dice from here to move that unit M. Unfortunately, it's not within charge move of that mounted force, but they can get very, very near to it. So they'll do that. They'll move up. They want to try and finish those hearth guards off. So they're going to use the second dice on here to charge in. Of course, it will give them a fatigue, but in they go. They're charging in to that melee to try and finish off that Hearthguard unit. But it does get, as I say, a fatigue because it's the second time that unit's been activated. So we do know they get an attack for each man in the unit, so they get 8 dice. There you go, put those there. The Hearthguard get 4, put that there. The Hearthguard unit has got armour of 5, and the warriors have got an armour of 4. So these guys, because they charged in, they can't go into close ranks. You can only do that if you're defending, and obviously cavalry can't form close ranks because it's only infantry can do that. So there's no debate over anyone going to close ranks here. So it's up to the Viking, as he's the attacker and as it's his move, to decide what he wants to do. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to use Frigg. You put a dice on that. So that's remove a fatigue from your unit or gain 3 attack dice. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll move that fatigue because it means that the opposing player can't use it. And now it's up to the Anglo-Saxons to decide what they're going to do. They've got nothing on their board and there's nothing they can do. They could have used their fatigue, but they can't do that, so they can't do anything. And now it's the turn of the Vikings again. Well, they are going to use the fatigue from the Hearthguard unit. And what they're going to do is they're going to reduce the armour of the Hearthguards down to 4. You see, they hope they won't need the extra 3 dice. They've got a better chance of causing casualties if they reduce the armour, which is why they wanted to remove that fatigue before the combat took place. So here we go. They're both hitting on 4s. I'll remove those dice now. We know they're both hitting on 4s. Let's do the Vikings first. So 4s, 5s and 6s cause a hit. Oh, it's not a very good roll, is it? It's only 2 hits. Look at that. In theory, law of averages would have said you'd get 4 hits there, but they didn't. So just put those to one side for the minute. The Hearthguard are fighting back. They're hitting on 4s, 5s and 6s as well. They got 2 hits. So let's roll first for the 2 hits that the Vikings got on the Anglo-Saxon. So the Anglo-Saxon player needs 5s and 6s here to save. Oh, would you believe that? They saved them both. So the Hearthguard took no casualties at all. And now the Vikings must roll 5s and 6s as well to save getting hit. And they saved 1, but lost a figure. So take a figure off. And because that unit lost a melee, it must pull back. And it must pull back S. There you go. And they both, of course, take a fatigue as the melee is now over. So the Vikings used 3 dice there to get that unit up, charge them in and use Frigg to give them a chance of wiping that unit out, and it all failed dismally. It's just the way it goes, I'm afraid, sometimes. So they were really lucky there. Right, so the Warlord still has his We Obey and his own activation. So he needs to do something here to gain the advantage again. He could this unit here has got 3 options. You could tell them to charge into this unit in the hope they'll wipe them out. They can charge the Bowman or they can charge the Warlord. So what I think we need to try and destroy this Hearthguard unit. So I think what he's going to do is going to tell them to do that. They're going to charge in the hope that they can do what the warriors should have done and didn't do. Right, so they've charged in. Remember, they're Hearthguard, so they get 8 attacks. There you go. And the other Anglo-Saxon Hearthguards, mounted Hearthguards, get 4 attacks. Right, there's nothing on the board that will help either the Vikings or the Anglo-Saxons, but there is of course a fatigue here. So they can either up their armour or downgrade the opposing armour. They've all got armour 5 at the moment. They're going to reduce the armour of this unit to 4. They want to try and get as many hits as they can. So let's roll their 8 dice first. They're hitting on 4s, 5s and 6s. There you go. So let's remove these ones that are misses. They got 4 hits. So let's now roll for the Anglo-Saxons. Now they're only hitting on 5s, remember? So they've only got 1 hit. So let's see whether the Vikings save that 1 hit. Yes, they do. And now the 4 hits on the Anglo-Saxons. They saved 2, but 2 of the attacks went home, so both of those figures come off. Now we have to measure to see whether anything was within S, which that one is, and so is the Warlord. So both of those units, the Warlord and the Levy back there, take a fatigue. And the cavalry are removed from play, they're dead. And now the last move that the Vikings have is the Warlord. So he could now charge in. Let's move this guy out of the way before he keeps falling over. He's got 2 options. He has got room to charge in here, or he can charge the Bowman. So what do you think he should do? There is a fatigue on both, so either way he can gain a slight advantage. They've got 8 attacks each. It'll be a real bonus if he can kill this mounted Warlord. Then that's really going to cause some problems. So I think that's what he's going to do. He's going to activate himself to charge in and attack the Anglo-Saxon Warlord. So let's see what happens. It's quite straightforward, this. They've both got 8 attacks each. So let's get 2 lots of 8 dice. The only difference is they both got armour of 5, but the Viking will use the Anglo-Saxon fatigue to reduce the armour to 4, and that's what they're going to do. So let's do the Viking attack first. They're looking for 4s and above. Take out the misses. Right, they do get 4 hits. And now, in reply, this Warlord needs 5s to cause a hit. Take out the misses, just 2. So it's 4-2 at the moment. So let's see whether the 2 hits on the Viking caused a casualty or not. No, he didn't save either. Now, a warlord has a rule called resilience, and the resilience rule means that if he takes a hit, as long as he's not exhausted, he can instead convert it to a fatigue. So the warlord takes 2 fatigues. He hasn't died, although he didn't save either of the 2 hits on him. He can take fatigue instead. So now it's the Anglo-Saxon warlord. He still needs 5s and 6s to save, and you can see he didn't save any at all, so he's got 4 hits on him. He can of course use 3 of those hits to take fatigues, 1, 2, and then the third one will of course exhaust him, and once you're exhausted you cannot then take any more fatigues. The 4th hit will kill him. So in fact the Anglo-Saxon warlord has been killed in that attack. He only needed 1 save and he would have survived, because although he would have been exhausted, he would have survived if he had saved 1 of those attacks, but he didn't. Oh, the other thing is, I forgot, this will take another fatigue because he died within S, and likewise the unit over there, which is now exhausted because it's got 3 fatigues. So when it's its turn, it can only rest. It can't do anything. It must try and rest to take one of those fatigues off. Well, that's a real game changer. The Viking Warlord took a bit of a risk there. He charged in the hope that he would be able to damage or kill the enemy Warlord. If the Anglo-Saxon Warlord had had Hearthguards next to him, they could have sacrificed themselves to take the kill, but he didn't. The other way around, if this warlord had taken say 2 more hits, he could have taken another fatigue, then he becomes exhausted, and then the 4th hit he could have sacrificed one of his own men. You can only do that if you've got Hearthguard nearby. So he knew he was quite safe going in there. That's why he took the risk, and as it happens, he only got 4 hits, but it was enough. The Anglo-Saxon didn't roll any saves, so he's dead. Which means it's now the Anglo-Saxon turn, and they've only got 2 dice, so it's not looking good for the Anglo-Saxons. Let's roll these 2 dice and see what they get. Okay, 2 common dice. They could have done with something better there. What they needed was a rare, because when you get a rare, when you roll a rare dice, you can use it on this, on the activation pool, that one there, and you can use that and you roll 2 more dice, and they really could have done with that now, because they're looking a bit dodgy. So they do have 2 dice. Where we're going to put them, let's think. So the Anglo-Saxons are really up against it here, because they've rolled 2 common dice. There's not much they can do with that. You can activate a unit of 8 of at least, activate a unit with at least 8 figures. So it could activate these twice to open fire on the Warlord in the hope that they kill him. He could rest them and then charge them in. Now the reason why they would do that, although there's 12 there, they've still got this call to arms, and this means to the end of the turn your levies have the aggression of warriors during melees, which means that although they still keep their armor, which is only 3, which means that if you look on the sheet here, they normally would only count 1/3 of their men fighting, which is just 4 figures, but because they effectively become warriors, they don't get the warrior armor, so the armor won't go up to 4, it stays at 3, but all 12 of them will actually attack. So it may be really the best thing to do. The other option would be to move these warriors up here and then attack with them, but you'd only get 8 attacks from them. You're going to get 12 from this unit. You're going to have to rest them first though, because they can't really go in with, well, they could go in with 2 fatigues, but it wouldn't be wise. So if you rest them and then charge them in using the other dice, so let's do that. I think they don't really have an option here. These mad, crazy, suicidal levy, the chances of shooting and killing the warlord is less than actually charging in the hope that they can do damage, because they can make use of his armor. You see, he could have used the fatigue they had to increase his armor if they shot. This way at least they've got a chance. I think so. You may disagree. There's various options you can do there. I've just taken the one that I think have got the best chance of success, albeit it is a bit of a tall order. So they've gone in. The warlord, in theory, he could close ranks here, but he then would only fight back with 4 dice. He's not going to do. He's a brave man. He's got the backup of his warriors here, his Hearthguard here, so he can use bodyguard on those. So he's just going to take the hit. So that's 8 dice. Let's do it over here. So the warlord will get 8 attack dice. Let's put them down there. And as I say, these bowmen have gone in, and because they've used call to arms, which is until the end of the turn your levies have the aggression of warriors, so they will all fight. They got 12 attack dice, so that's a really strong, in fact probably the strongest thing on the Anglo-Saxon board, which is why you often see Anglo-Saxon armies with quite a few levy, because if you use that, all their levies become like warriors for one move. As I say, the armour doesn't go up, but they do get all the men fighting as if they're warriors, so they get 12 attack dice there. The next thing to work out, there's nothing on either board now, but the attacker can decide what they're going to do about the armour. Right, so it's now the turn of the attacker to decide what he wants to do. He doesn't want to use the fatigue because that's already 2 fatigues on there. If they want to try and kill him, they've got to try and really, he shouldn't really leave those on. But the warlord himself can use the fatigue of the Anglo-Saxons to up his armour to 6. And there we have a problem. Now what does the levy do? Do they use the fatigue to bring him down, or are they just going to try and hit him on 6s? It's a tall order, isn't it? I mean, it's really not a good position to be in. They either leave it as it is and they only need 1 more hit to exhaust him, then any other hit after that will be a casualty either on him or his Hearthguard, or they can reduce the armour, but by reducing the armour down to 5, it means they've got a much better chance of hitting. So I think they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to bring him down to at least a 5. Otherwise, you're going to be too hard to hit. And they still have an option of reducing him again to 4. I think we'll do that, you know. I think they'll take the risk here. They've got 12 dice. They've got a 50% chance of causing a hit now. And that's what they're going to do. Yep, so we decided. So let the warlord fight first. He's got 8 dice. I'm just going to move the camera slightly so you can see where I'm rolling. Right, so these are the warlord hits first. They need 3, 4s, 5s and 6s. So that's 5 hits. 5 hits for the warlord. Let's see, let's save those straight away. So the levy saves on 5s and 6s. They saved 2, so they took 3 casualties. Let's take those off straight away. Right, now this is where the Anglo-Saxons are hoping that they roll well. To hit, they need 4s, 5s and 6s. Let's see what we get. Oh dear, it's not that good, is it? Look at all those 1s and 2s. Crikey. Hasn't worked. They got 4 hits. The warlord then saves on 5s and 6s. He saved 3 of them anyway. He's got 1 hit. He just takes a single fatigue for that hit. the levy have to bounce back. They have to go back S. Let's push them back a little bit further. There you go. I'm just doing this quickly. I would normally spend a bit more time measuring this, but they've gone back. And yeah, it's not looking good, is it? The game is, I think, effectively over, frankly, because it's the turn of the Vikings. Let's just see. They get 1, 2. They get 3 dice. They're only rolling 3 dice, but you know, it's still not bad. The Warlord has only got 1 fatigue. He's got a Hearthguard unit here, a unit of 7 warriors here. All right, these warriors have never really recovered from when they got fired at by all those bowmen. And the Anglo-Saxons have got a decent unit here of warriors over in that corner. But the other 2 levy units are in trouble. There's nothing on their board. So let's see how near they are. Yeah, they're within range of those, and the Warlord's in range of those. So in fact, what will happen next move is they'll both charge in. I'm sure they'll do enough to reduce. In fact, they can ignore those really. They can just come in over here. With it, first of all, is the Warlord can go in, and I think it's all over. I really can't see the Anglo-Saxons recovering from this. And as this video has gone on long enough anyway, I think I'm going to call it. So the Vikings managed to win the day, and hope you can see from that. I mean, it's very difficult to demonstrate a game in a reasonable amount of time. I wanted you to see how the board worked and the mechanics of the game. That's what I've been trying to get over to you, and I hope that has worked. But because they're quite a complex set of rules, really, to learn in the first place. There's a lot of little things you need to read up on, and I really haven't covered anything yet. But if I covered everything in the book, it'll be about a 4-hour video. Obviously, that would be pretty boring. It's quite an unusual sort of rule set, really. These boards is what it's all about, and you have to learn those boards to see which, if you're fighting Vikings, which of the activations or the uses of those boards will benefit you most. And the same with Anglo-Saxons. The strong thing on the Anglo-Saxons is this call to arms. It is a rare dice, but if you can convert your levy into warriors for 1 move, it's very powerful. The Vikings have got 2 or 3 nice things as well for melee. We didn't use Valhalla. This is an interesting one where you remove between 1 and 3 warriors or Hearthguards. You wouldn't do it with Hearthguards, you do it with warriors, and gain 3 attack dice per figure. So if you wanted to go into a suicidal attack, again a bit like Berserkers, you can cause damage with that. This is a nice one. Although it's 2 rare dice, it'll rarely be used until the end of the turn. The melee armor of all units is reduced by 1, and that is both sides, so it makes the Vikings even more suicidal. But all your charges are free activations, so if you do use 2 of those dice and you've got, say, 4 units within charge distance, you can just go crazy and send all 4 units in. And in fact, it also makes Valhalla up here a basic Saga ability, which means you can use it more than once, because on this part of the board you can only use each of those abilities once. You can use these as many times as you've got dice for, and that's what it means by becoming a basic Saga ability, which is used like so. That this ability Valhalla becomes like that. You can put then 2 or 3 dice on there and do it. If you've got enough dice, of course, to do it. In a big game where you're rolling 7 or 8 dice, then combining those 2 can be quite aggressive for the Viking. But the Vikings are a super aggressive army, and if you just want to get on the table and attack and attack and attack and go mad, then the Vikings are the one to use. Anglo-Saxons are a bit more defensive, but if they're used properly with reasonable sized levy units, then as long as you get call to arms, it can be very useful. So yeah, you need to learn the board and use it to the best of your ability, to your advantage, to try and win the game. It's an unusual rule set. It's one I've played for many years, and I do enjoy it. The only thing I would say is that because of the complexity of the rules, someone that knows the rule better than you should in theory always win if they know what they're doing. So if you go in not quite sure what you're doing and how to use a board, then you play someone that does know what they're doing and does know how to use their board, you're going to find it really hard work. But at the end of the day also, it depends on how the dice roll. You know, look at that crazy Berserker unit that charged over here, and they hit those levy, and some of them should have died in that attack, but they survived it all. Although they got took out badly by the bowmen in the next move, and it took 2 hearth cards or 4 hearth cards charging in to finish them off, and they killed 2 of them anyway. So those Berserkers are a really useful unit, but they were a bit lucky to survive that first attack and not take any casualties. But as I say, that's how the dice roll, and another day you roll and they could have all been wiped out. Right, so yeah, so that's it guys. The video went on a bit longer than I anticipated, but to get through a whole game, although I didn't have a big army on the table, it still takes a little time. But I wanted to show you the mechanics, I wanted to show you how the board worked, and hopefully I've done that. If you haven't played Saga before and you're thinking of trying them, this will give you an idea how they work. And they're a lovely set of rules. They're quite different to the normal sort of rule set you play, but they work. They work for me. I don't play them as much as I used to. There's a few people at my club that have become very competitive with these, and it's become quite a serious game. And I'm not a serious player these days. I just like to have a game and enjoy it, whatever. And you can't go into a Saga game just for a little bit of fun and a relaxing evening. It just doesn't work out, especially if you're playing serious players. You've got to know what you're doing. But they are fun. They're good fun. And the rule set, if I've got a complaint, the rule set, sometimes there are some boards that are very, very powerful, and if they play a board that maybe is slightly weak, it can be a bit one-sided. As long as you're careful about who plays who, which factions fight which factions, as long as you're careful about that, you can generally get a pretty good game. So that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon.